It was just after 7 in the morning when I stepped out onto my porch, coffee in hand, and the cold Montana air cut straight through my flannel shirt, the kind of air that wakes you up better than any caffeine could. I took a long, slow sip and let my eyes wander over the golden streaks of light spilling over the mountain peaks, watching the frost on the barn roof start to melt away in thin trickles. It should have been a perfect, peaceful start to my day. But then I saw the county cruiser roll slowly up my gravel driveway, red and blue lights flashing against the side of my old farmhouse, and a young deputy I had never met before stepped out, his boots crunching on the frost-covered gravel. He looked a little uncertain, like a man walking into a situation he was not entirely comfortable with. He stopped a few feet away from me, adjusted his hat, and cleared his throat before saying, "We got a report of a trespasser on this property refusing to vacate, and I nearly spat out my coffee, not because I was angry, but because it was almost too ridiculous to believe I had been standing on this same patch of land since before the man in front of me had probably learned how to spell the word trespassing, and my family had owned this land since 1943, when my grandfather Jeremiah bought it with his GI Bill money after coming back from the war." I took another slow sip of coffee to give myself a moment to keep my voice calm, and then I reached into my back pocket, pulled out my leather badge wallet, flipped it open, and said, "Deputy Sheriff Ezra Blackwood, reporting for duty right here on his own 40 acres. I gestured to the wide expanse of pasture behind me, the old red barn leaning just enough to tell you it had seen decades of storms and harvests. The chicken coop standing solid and clean, the rows of vegetables still wet with dew, and that was when I saw her Karen Peaton standing at the edge of my driveway in her shiny designer boots that had never touched a muddy field, and those oversized sunglasses that made her look like she was trying to hide in plain sight. Her perfectly styled bottle blonde hair catching the light as she tilted her head and pretended to be shocked, as if she had not been the one to make the call in the first place. She gave me that smug little half smile, the one she wore every time she thought she was winning, and I knew right then this was no random misunderstanding. This was part of a game she had been playing for weeks, maybe even months. Karen had been trying to use the HOA to push me off my land with threats of fines and bogus zoning complaints ever since she showed up on my porch 3 weeks earlier with a manila folder thick enough to choke a shredder. She had stood there in the exact same spot, her overpowering floral perfume so strong my chickens had stopped pecking the ground to stare, and announced in her most condescending tone that I was now part of Willowbrook Estates and subject to their community rules. I had told her calmly that I was not part of the HOA, but she had laughed this harsh, sharp laugh that sounded like a car struggling to start in the dead of winter, and handed me a certified letter saying I had 30 days to bring my so-called agricultural situation into compliance. That meant removing the barn, tearing down the chicken coop, getting rid of the vegetable stand, and relocating all my farm equipment. The fines for non-compliance would be $500 a day. She said it all with this air of superiority, like she was doing me a favor by letting me know before she started charging me. And I had stood there with the taste of my morning coffee turning bitter in my mouth, watching her eyes flick back and forth over my land with this hungry look, the kind of look someone gets when they see not what is, but what could be, if they owned it. Karen never cared about aesthetic standards. She cared about the 40 acres my grandfather had worked for and that I had inherited after a messy divorce. She cared about the development potential. And I knew her husband Braden, who owned Peaton Construction, had been sniffing around for years trying to buy up land near Willowbrook Estates for some new luxury build project. But the problem for them was I was not selling, and I was not under their jurisdiction. Most of the people in Willowbrook were good neighbors. They came by to buy produce from my stand. They let their kids feed Buttercup, my goat. They liked having a bit of real country life next door. But Karen had rallied a small group who believed my farm was lowering their property values. She had filed complaints with the county zoning board, claiming my animals created a health hazard. She had posted pictures of my land in the neighborhood. Facebook group taken from strange angles that made it look like my clean, well-kept farm was falling apart. She was building her case in the court of public opinion, and when that did not work, she decided to try humiliation, which is how I ended up standing there that morning with a county deputy on my porch, and Karen smirking on the sidewalk thinking she had cornered me. But what she did not know was that I had been busy doing some digging of my own. 15 years in law enforcement teaches you that people like Karen rarely read the fine print. They just assume they can bend rules to their will. I had spent the past week at the county records office going through the original HOA incorporation paperwork, and I found the one detail that changed everything. My property had never been annexed into Willowbrook Estates. There was no legal authority over me. No covenants, no fines, nothing. And I found something even more interesting. Braden Peton had filed preliminary development plans with the county for my exact 40 acres, complete with sketches of luxury homes, a private park, and a man-made lake. The paperwork had been submitted without my signature or consent, which was more than just shady. It was illegal. I sat on that information waiting for the right moment. And that moment came when Karen made the mistake of calling 911 on me, thinking she could make a scene. I looked the young deputy in the eye and asked him to step aside. Then I walked right up to Karen, standing there with her arms crossed, and that smug little smile. I told her in a clear, steady voice that she was under arrest for filing a false police report, trespassing onto my property during one of her so-called inspections, and for ongoing harassment. The look on her face was priceless. It was as if the ground had dropped out from under her. She stammered, trying to call for her husband. But the deputy who had driven up was already reading her rights and clicking the handcuffs around her wrists. The neighbors started to come out of their houses one by one, some still in pajamas clutching mugs of coffee. Others just frozen in their driveways, staring at the HOA Queen Bee being led to the back of a county cruiser. It was quiet except for the sound of the door shutting and the cruiser pulling away, leaving only the echo of tires on gravel. I turned back toward my porch, the steam from my coffee still curling into the cold air, the mountains still gold in the morning light, and I felt this deep, solid satisfaction, not just because I had stopped her, but because I had defended what was mine. I knew this would not be the last time someone tried to take a piece of it, but for now the fight was over, and Karen had lost before she even realized the game had truly begun.